It always starts with something so small that no one in the moment could possibly imagine the scale of destruction it will unleash. A single decision made in a quiet room, a tiny spark in a faraway city, one ship drifting a few meters off course, a number in a ledger shifting slightly higher than usual. Nothing dramatic, nothing that makes headlines, nothing that feels like the destiny of nations is being rewritten. Yet again and again throughout history, the world has been shaken not by grand disasters, but by the tiniest events no one paid attention to. And by the time people realized what was happening, the chain reaction had already escaped control. That is the economic butterfly effect. The idea that one small event, almost invisible, can collide with a fragile system and collapse an entire nation. It's a pattern we've seen repeat for centuries, a pattern we still see today, a pattern we still deny, right up until the moment the collapse becomes impossible to ignore. Because every major financial disaster, every revolution, every geopolitical breakdown begins long before the headlines. It begins with a system so tightly stretched that even the smallest nudge can send it crashing down. And the question that should keep all of us awake at night is simple. If something so tiny can destroy nations, how many tiny things are happening right now that we haven't noticed yet? To understand this, we need to go back to a moment that altered the entire 20th century. Not with a war, not with an invasion, not with a treaty, but with a single, barely coordinated assassination on a quiet street in Sarajevo. Most people know the big story of World War I, the armies, the alliances, the trenches. But almost no one talks about the moment that started it all. A moment so small that if just one person had stepped 5 seconds later, or if one driver had taken a different turn, the entire modern world might look different. On June 28, 1914, a young man named Gavrilo Princip stepped out of a crowd and shot Archduke Franz Ferdinand. 2 bullets, 2 lives lost. On the surface, it looked like a tragic yet localized political act. Even the newspapers didn't grasp its weight. Nobody watching that scene unfold believed that this tiny incident would rip apart empires, rewrite borders, collapse currencies, and permanently alter the global financial order. But the real story wasn't the assassination itself, it was the chain reaction it triggered. The Austro-Hungarian Empire demanded justice. Serbia resisted. Russia mobilized to protect Serbia. Germany mobilized to protect Austria. France mobilized against Germany. Britain mobilized to protect France. A web of alliances, built over decades, fragile, rigid, and untested, snapped into action. Each decision seemed small. Each step felt logical. Each leader believed they were simply responding to the last move. But the system they were inside was too delicate, too interconnected, too dependent on perfect stability. And a single event, almost random, had broken the equilibrium. Within months, Europe was on fire. The economies of entire nations were swallowed by war financing. Gold reserves evaporated, inflation climbed, trade routes shut down, currencies devalued, empires that had survived centuries collapsed in a matter of years. Austria-Hungary shattered, Russia burned. Germany fell into a financial abyss that paved the way for extremism. And all of it began with a moment so small that most people in that crowd had no idea what they had just witnessed. The butterfly effect isn't philosophical. It's real, it's historical. And every time, the world pretends it won't happen again. But if that event felt small, the next one felt even smaller. The spark that ignited the French Revolution began not with politics, not with ideology, not with anger in the streets, but with the price of bread. For years, France was drowning in debt. Wars, poor taxation systems, and a monarchy that refused to reform had pushed the economy into a fragile balance. Harvest failures pushed grain prices upward. But it wasn't a famine that started the revolution. It wasn't hunger alone. It was the moment the price of bread rose just enough that ordinary people couldn't buy their daily loaf. It is difficult today to understand the impact of such a small shift. A few coins, a slight increase, barely noticeable in financial records. But France's economy was structured like a tower of dry sticks, and bread was the foundation stone. When that stone cracked, the entire structure began to shake. Families could no longer feed themselves. Fear became anger. Anger became unrest. Small protests turned into riots. Rumors spread faster than facts. The government responded poorly. The system became even more fragile. The bread crisis was not the cause of the revolution. It was the trigger that set off a chain reaction already waiting to explode. And once it began, it became unstoppable. Financial collapse turned into political collapse. Political collapse turned into social collapse. The monarchy fell, the streets ran with violence, and within a few years, the entire French political and economic structure was erased. A tiny increase in the price of one basic item defeated an empire that had survived for centuries. What makes this story even more unsettling is how familiar it feels today. Modern economies rely on supply chains stretched across the planet. Prices are influenced by faraway events that most people will never hear about. And when those systems are fragile, even small disruptions can send shockwaves through the entire global market. We saw this recently in one of the most bizarre economic triggers in modern history, the moment when a single giant ship became stuck sideways in a narrow canal in Egypt. In March 2021, the Ever Given ran aground in the Suez Canal. A gust of wind, a slight miscalculation, a minor navigational error, no one is fully sure, but the consequences were immediate. One ship blocked one canal, not 5 ships, not 10, just one. For 6 days, world trade froze. Oil prices jumped, shipping costs exploded, manufacturing slowed, store shelves emptied. Economies that depended on just-in-time supply systems faced delays cascading across continents. And the most disturbing part wasn't the event itself, but what it revealed. The global economy had become so optimized, so interconnected, and so dependent on perfect timing that one stuck ship could shake the entire world. People laughed at the memes, but behind the jokes, governments, economists, and major corporations saw something terrifying. If one ship could do this, what else could? A fire in a factory, a delayed shipment of microchips, a miscommunication at a port. When a system becomes this fragile, anything can break it. And in the years since the Suez incident, we've seen smaller and smaller disruptions create larger and larger consequences. But perhaps the clearest example of this pattern is one we lived through recently, where the origin was so microscopic, so ordinary, so invisible that no one, not even experts, understood the scale of what was coming. A single virus, emerging in one city, spread quietly at first. A few cases, a few reports, a handful of warnings, nothing that seemed capable of freezing the global economy. Nothing that seemed capable of shutting down factories, grounding planes, collapsing businesses, destabilizing currencies, or rewriting global supply chains. But the world was already fragile. Decades of hyper-efficiency had created systems that were astonishingly productive but dangerously brittle. Companies carried no excess inventory. Ports ran at maximum capacity. Supply chains stretched across dozens of countries. One missing link could break the entire chain. And that's exactly what happened. Factories shut down. Workers stayed home. Ships waited offshore. Trade slowed to a crawl. Prices warped. Governments pumped money into systems that no longer functioned smoothly. And the effects spread far beyond health. Small businesses vanished. Inflation rose. Debt increased. Labor markets shifted. And the long-term economic consequences are still rippling through every corner of the global financial ecosystem. Again, it began with something tiny, something invisible, something most people ignored until the reaction became too big to stop. These events are separated by centuries, but they follow the exact same pattern. A tiny incident touches a fragile system. The system reacts. The reaction spreads. The spread becomes uncontrollable, and collapse follows. What makes the pattern so dangerous is that people consistently misread it. They look for the big causes. They look for dramatic signs. They look for major failures. But the real threat is always hidden in the small details no one notices. This is why so many modern crises feel sudden. They weren't sudden. They were building quietly beneath the surface, waiting for a small trigger. And when that trigger arrives, people are always shocked by how fast everything unravels. The collapse seems instant, but the truth is, the collapse began long before. The system was already weak. When we look around the world today, we see similar structural weaknesses everywhere. National debts rising to historic levels, supply chains stretched thin, political divisions widening, economies dependent on perfect stability in a world that rarely provides it. And even though we don't know which tiny event will trigger the next chain reaction, history suggests that it will be small, unexpected, and dismissed at first. A regulatory mistake, a failed bank transaction, a data glitch, a cyber attack on a shipping company, a drought in a single farming region, a shortage of a rare mineral, a diplomatic misunderstanding. The pattern does not change, only the trigger changes. This is why historians, economists, and analysts constantly warn that we often focus on the wrong things. We watch the headlines, we watch the stock markets, we watch political speeches. But the events that matter are happening quietly, without attention, in places most people never think to look. A tiny shift in energy markets, a miscalculation in monetary policy, a small disruption in manufacturing. Most people ignore these details, and yet they are the very details that have collapsed empires, rewritten borders, and reshaped global power. If you follow the timeline of economic collapses, revolutions, and geopolitical crises, a clear message emerges. Economies do not fall from massive disasters. They fall from tiny mistakes nobody notices, because once a chain reaction begins inside a fragile system, it becomes almost impossible to stop. The system doesn't collapse because of the size of the trigger. It collapses because of the weakness already inside it. And that brings us to the unsettling question: what kind of small event could trigger the next crisis? A glitch in an AI-driven stock exchange? A shortage of a rare component used in millions of devices? A diplomatic conflict over a resource? A local bank failure that spreads international fear? A cyber attack on an energy grid? We don't know. But history tells us it won't be something dramatic. It will be something tiny, almost laughably small, that escapes our attention until it's too late. When the Archduke was shot, nobody thought the world was about to burn. When bread prices rose, nobody thought a monarchy would fall. When a ship got stuck, nobody thought global inflation would rise. When a virus appeared in one city, nobody thought planes would stop flying and borders would close. But this is how collapses always begin. What matters now is whether we recognize the pattern, whether we understand that fragility, not the trigger, is the true danger, and whether we're willing to learn from the past instead of repeating it. So I want to ask you directly, do you think a small event today could trigger the next major crisis? Which of these historical moments shocked you the most? And if you want a part 2, where we explore other tiny events that changed the world forever, let me know in the comments. Because the butterfly effect is not a theory. It's a warning written across centuries of economic disasters. A warning that the smallest events are often the ones that matter most. And as we move deeper into a world more interconnected, more complex, and more fragile than any society before us, the next major crisis may already be unfolding quietly, somewhere, triggered by something so small that nobody sees it yet. In the end, history teaches us one thing with absolute clarity. Nations done to crumble because of one big mistake. They crumble because of 1,000 tiny ones. And the final trigger, the butterfly that flaps its wings, arrives when we least expect it. And somewhere in the world right now, that moment may already be in motion.